If your brain and mouth are a busy freeway for your words, racing at times and jammed up at others, then punctuation is the highway patrol, emergency vehicles, or other policing types that keep things moving as smoothly as they can. If you love to talk but hesitate to write, punctuation might be one of the reasons for that. Because punctuation is unique to written language and it takes an extra degree of intentionality to learn and use. Something that anybody using talk-to-text technology can attest to. Where is my super suit? Question mark. Exclamation point. But believe me, knowing your punctuation rules might be one of the most important aspects of your writing to learn. The day-to-day application alone makes it worth your time. Today we're looking at two of the most frequently used types of punctuation, periods and commas, on this week's Words from the Muck. The period is probably the first piece of punctuation you learned about back in first grade. It's the dot that goes at the end of the sentence or at the end of an abbreviation. But where I still see people getting confused is when to use them to stop their sentences from going on for what seems like an eternity. You see, when we speak, we can just link ideas together and never really stop our word flow, but when we write, all that flow causes some problems if it isn't broken up from time to time. Periods mostly come into play at the end of one of your clauses, that word group that contains at least one noun-verb combo. A simple sentence will have a period show up rather quickly, but the compound and complex ones might just start to tempt you to start writing like a crazy person. So to figure out when to end your sentence, think to yourself, do the words I have so far give me enough to adequately convey an idea? So to do that, we have to think about compound complex or compound complex sentences again. Because Reginald played so much Fortnite. That works, right? No? Of course not. Because it's a dependent clause. To use a period now would create a fragment, so we can't use a period just yet. Because Reginald played so much Fortnite, he wasn't prepared for his test in human behaviors class. And that should do it. Remember to only end your sentence if you have at least one independent clause in your sentence. But what if you wanted to add more? I'm glad you asked! You can add more and more clauses if you think that all the ideas fit together. As it stands, the idea of playing Fortnite was necessary for better understanding the idea of Reginald's not being prepared for his test. So if you have more ideas that also relate to this idea, you can add them in too. Because Reginald played so much Fortnite, he wasn't prepared for his test in his human behaviors class, and he failed the test. Now we have a compound complex sentence made of one dependent clause and two independent clauses. So this is a good time to start talking about commas. Commas have tons of rules because they get used for pretty much everything. For today, we are only going to look at a couple of their uses and save the rest for like a future episode. Like down the line, a ways. In Reginald's case, you'll notice we used commas twice in that sentence, and that's because one of the uses for commas is to divide up clauses so a reader can keep certain information separate from other information. This keeps Reginald's fortnighting, his not preparing, and his failing all in distinct sectors of the sentence. Each section presents a clear idea that we don't want mixing in with each other, but they are still part of the same sentence because they are all still related. Let's try another example. Before recent technological advances, the military enlisted spy cats to cross enemy lines, infiltrate secret enemy bases, and steal classified information from foreign governments. That is all 100% true, by the way. So we're adding a new comma rule in for this sentence. First, we have the division of the clauses that we've already talked about. Before recent technological advances is a prepositional phrase, which we're not going to go into right now, but we will some other time. What's important is that it is not a sentence on its own, so it needs to be linked up to an independent clause. But I'm also using commas toward the end of the sentence when I start making lists. Whenever you write a list of more than two objects, actions, or phrases, divide the items in your list up with commas. In our spy cat example, we have three different verbs, each with their own phrases: cross, infiltrate, and steal. So we put a comma before we include each new item. So if your ice cream is warm, melty, and messy, or you go to school by running down the street, climbing a lookout tower, and ziplining across the river, then you place commas between each phrase. So you do have to be a little bit careful once you start getting into comma territory, because sometimes your sentences can just go on forever, and technically you're doing it correctly because you're putting a comma between each clause and all the things in your list, and it should work out great, right? Wrong! So this is the last bit of advice before we finish today. Commas allow us to add more and more phrases or clauses together, but you can overdo it. In your writing, think about how much information is best for one sentence. How much information can you really connect without the reader getting lost in too many details? So a few rules of thumb. You will rarely need to build a sentence longer than 3 or 4 clauses. Like there's times where it can be really cool, but You usually don't need to. Also remember that longer isn't always better. Shorter sentences can be extremely powerful. So, if you're typing your work, try to keep your sentences within 2 lines. If you're writing it out by hand, maybe check to make sure your sentences aren't getting longer than about 30 words or so. That's it for this week's episode. We talked about using periods only if your sentence includes at least 1 independent clause, using commas to divide multiple clauses, using commas to break up lists of more than 3 items, and making sure you don't abuse your power by creating ludicrously lengthy linguistic leviathans. Thanks for watching Words from the Muck. Like this video if you suspect your cat of being a spy cat, and subscribe for more wordly wisdom. To hold you over until the next episode, revisit our video on juxtaposition to learn more about how the placement of words and clauses can add more meaning to your writing. And until next time, farewell, good people.